One group of depraved sickos who have garnered ire from every corner of the internet is the zoophile community. Of the pro zoophilia podcast Zooier Than Thou. The contents of this podcast, while disturbing, are only the tip of a seemingly endless A majority of the information available about Doug comes from a book titled Uniquely Dangerous. Maureen Maloney, Uniquely Dangerous is a 366-page biography that should be taken with a grain of salt. Regardless, there is a lot of information here that gives a good insight into Doug's early life, and will help us understand just what made him so depraved. Douglas Brian Spink was born on March 17, 1971, in the beginnings, but this is simply not the case. His father worked as a salesman for a construction company, and his mother had inherited a small fortune from her late grandfather to entice a handful of mistresses during his marriage. To no one's surprise, this habitual infidelity led the rest of the family to resent Jack, finding solace with each other, as well as the family's pets and livestock. The Spink family residence was also home to a wide plethora of animals. It was only natural that Doug fostered a deep love for them as he grew up. In particular, he developed an affinity for horses, spending a lot of time on horseback throughout his neighborhood. Whenever he wasn't in the barn, he enjoyed studying and reading books, often choosing to do his homework instead of playing with other children. Despite being an extremely intelligent child, he found human beings to be confusing and preferred the company of animals. Because of his emphatic passions, poor social skills, and his at the time undiagnosed autism, Doug was supposedly singled out by his peers and relentlessly bullied, even by his own sister, who gave him the nickname of Pony Boy. In a forum post made in 2008, Doug reflected on how he learned to deal with the bullying. I decided that I didn't care if people hated me. I'd carry on with my life, do my thing, but hey, I was glad to at least not be the brunt of every school prank. At the age of 8, Doug claims to have been molested by an older friend. This belief likely brought him comfort in dealing with his trauma, as Doug preferred Animal 364, and we'd get frisky and then just cuddle under a tree or bush for hours. Until at last, I had to return. Zoocide was known by nobody, and I did everything possible to stamp it out so I could lead a good life. Needless to say, looking down the barrel of a lifetime spent to someone who is by definition despised, attacked, potentially prosecuted, and perhaps sent to a mental institution in the old days, isn't exactly in his academic endeavors, so much so that he was given the honor of delivering the scholar's speech at his high school graduation. He then began studying at Reed College, where he earned a bachelor's degree in anthropology, before attending the University of Chicago, where he received his master's in business administration. Founding Timberline Direct in 1996, which managed various catalog brands specializing in goods chain called GI. From the rest was Capone, a black stallion with 3 white socks, regarded as one of the world's best show jumpers. Doug apparently loved Capone in particular for more than his remarkable skills. Regarding this horse as the love of his life. In a post made a letter almost certainly written to Capone. Perfect, no matter how hard I try. I also know that you understand, and that you're not upset even when a day goes sideways in horses when courting his victims. This is likely because being married to a woman, he was actually homosexual, although he only had a slight interest in human males. Because despite being married to a woman, he was actually homosexual, although he only had a slight interest in human males. These hidden details of his sexuality slowly eroded his 6-year marriage from the inside out. I suppose every feeling I had for my partners had to be hidden and denied around others. That kind of life, really, I slowly came to see it as a blessing and not a curse. Worst fear had come true. I slowly came to see it as a blessing and not a curse. If I wasn't doing anything horrible in my zoo life, and I really don't think I am in an objective sense, then why am I so ashamed of it? Why did I hate that side of myself so much? It's been a long, slow, challenging process, so I don't backslide into old, unhealthy habits of thought. This revelation, while supposedly emotionally beneficial for Doug, was the catalyst of a few misfortunes as idiots from one of his businesses, alleging they had converted property and assets without permission, stole corporate opportunities, and breached the terms of their employment contracts. This did not pan out well for Doug, as he was ultimately found liable and forced to pay out $5.7 million to one of the defendants, a New Jersey businessman named Kit Kung. Just like that, all that Doug had worked for was gone, and he was forced to file for bankruptcy in 2002. No longer capable of affording his home loan payments, a close friend and business associate, Paul Peterson, purchased the mortgage and allowed Doug to continue living there, under the condition that he paid rent. Despite this agreement, he made no effort to contribute financially, which led the house to be foreclosed on after Peterson ceased making payments. Despite the kindness shown by Paul, Doug of rage, breaking windows, punching holes in the walls, and even smearing the home's exterior with dog feces. Facing his pending bankruptcy case, Doug made the decision to flee to Canada, in the hopes of starting a new life and dodging the repercussions. Before leaving for good, he confronted his wife Judy and requested ownership of his favorite golden retriever, Ryan. His wife initially refused, but after he threatened to gut her like a fish and hang her from a tree, she ultimately decided to give Ryan back to him. With his 5 horses and 5 dogs, Doug traveled north until he reached Pitt Meadows, British Columbia. It was there that he met a woman by the name of Corinne Super. Corinne, along with her husband Mark, were horse trainers, and strangely allowed him to stay in and the sexual nature of his relationships with them. This open acknowledgement of animal abuse on a wide range of forums would make the name Fausti in particular an infamous one. Although almost no archives from this time remain online, as many of the forums he frequented. Aren't you ashamed of who you are? No, I'm not. I'm just a simple Buddhist, so I don't get to argue that my super being can kick your super being's ass. Instead, my spiritual choice is simple. I try to do what I can to help the world to be a better place, to minimize suffering, and to manifest genuine love. Though I've tried and tried, nowhere in there can I figure out where my zoo-ish relations with my boys break the rules. They're happy, I'm happy, we love each other. End of story. Isn't it abuse? It's simply logically impossible to declare interspecies intimacy to be abuse as well. As a friend once commented with a certain flair for poetic imagery, how can it be abuse to lick a dog's balls, but not be abuse to cut them off? Oh my god, bro.
Fucking... Oh my god. I'm gonna literally fucking puke. What the hell? What the Hellington? Bro.
Imagery. How can it be abuse to lick a dog's balls, but not be abuse to cut them off? Named a beast forum, where he alleged anything. While she didn't expect anything at first, it wasn't long until Corinne took note of Doug's strange behavior and unorthodox philosophies about humans and animals. He refers to people as two-leggers. He says that there is a four-legged world and there was a so those rules don't apply to him. He wanted to be with the dogs and the horses. He would always have a very private boundary. He calls it the boundaries. If the barn doors are shut, you do not enter under any circumstance. He would say, do not enter, period. If the barn doors are, I was well aware of this, where she says, I've always tried hard to understand your emotional plumbing. If it seems like I've been trying to replumb you, 5 seems to indicate the opposite. In the barn, when you told me you hoped one day, I did not mean it. I am a sexual creature that likes to be touched, and 5 seems to indicate the opposite. In the barn, when you told me you hoped one day I would understand, I finally get it. I truly do. I would understand. I finally get it. I truly do. I feel uncomforting to learn that it is me as a species. Uncomforting to learn that it is me as a species and a female, but it is not me as a person. Serious self-doubt in a female, but it is not me as a person. Serious self-doubt and reflecting. That being said, Doug even out and reflecting. That being said, Doug even alleged that Corinne was a career criminal who recruited him to smuggle drugs over the Canadian border. Her background, of course, is in the drug business. Corinne Super, background, of course, is in the drug business. Corinne Super has made her living from there, and we were in of cocaine at the Canadian border. The feds discovered 4 large suitcases and 1 small unconfirmed. Doug, on the other hand, certainly was. In January of 2005, he was located on a well-known drug smuggling route by U.S. border agents in Loomis National Forest. One of the agents at the scene claimed that Doug appeared National Forest. One of the agents at the scene claimed that Doug appeared with over 372 pounds of coke in the back of his vehicle. Because of this, is a horticulture 72 pounds of coke in the back of his vehicle. Because of this, is a horticulture instructor at the prison's education department. They also found time to repair the broken relationships with his parents, specifically his mother Claire, who grew distant with him during his marriage to Judy. For his dogs and horses, Doug leased his stallions to her and allowed her to collect all the prize money earned until his release. During his time, his horse Capone would flourish in professional competition, winning 10 Grand Prix titles in his career. In 2007, he was even ranked as one of the top 200 show jumpers on the planet, earning him an estimated value of several $1 million. Despite this previous agreement, Super wanted more. Well aware of his carnal desires for Capone, she petitioned to acquire ownership of the champion show horse, a right she would easily be granted. Doug was released early from back, sparking a custody battle over the champion show horse. While Super claimed she wanted Capone out of love, Doug believed she solely wanted to profit from him. Capone to stockpile Capone's loads, which ran a market price of $2,500 per emission. During a heated argument over the phone, Doug stepped outside the parking lot where they would reach an agreement, with Capone being returned to Doug. At this point, things were looking up for him. His time in prison soured the prospect of returning to drug running, and he set his sights on becoming a veterinarian. He would be accepted into Washington State University, only to have the offer rescinded once the establishment learned of his past of fraud and incarceration. Doug also believed they may have discovered his public outing as a zoophile. Decided to dip his police involved. She was openly confessed to taking Capone, alleging that Doug wasn't properly taking care of him, was sexually abusing him, which is true, and affirmed that she is the rightful owner. This difference of perspective fueled a heated legal dispute between Spink and Super, with little progress made over time. The police were unable to assist, with the deputy assigned to Point Stallions Limite to try to prove ownership. None of the documents were sufficient evidence to establish ownership of Capone. Corinne also submitted numerous documents to try to prove ownership, and none of those documents were sufficient information provided, in an effort to prove ownership plan to get Capone back. Unable to enter Canada due to his probation requirements, he enlisted the help of his landlord, Sharon Monroe, to assist him in retrieving his champion show horse. Monroe traveled to Corinne's farm under the pretense of seeking advice in dealing with Doug. After Monroe left, Corinne set off to pick up her daughter from school and wanted to steal Capone back and return him to Doug. This chase came to a halt as Corinne pulled into the parking lot of the local police department. Before finally leaving, before finally leaving, and this would be the last time Corinne Super saw Sharon Monroe. Out of options, Doug realized the only person who could retrieve Capone was himself. As Thanksgiving approached, he figured Corinne may not be around to keep an eye on the farm during the holidays, and he was right, as she would spend Thanksgiving weekend out of town. Doug, in the dead of night, snuck into Super's barn and stole Capone back. The first to inform Corinne that her champion show horse was stolen was Doug himself, sending her a 2-word text message. Check in Super, and law enforcement couldn't find him. On July 2nd, 2005, Kenneth D. Pinion, James Michael Tate, and a third unknown person snuck into a local barn. With the intent of abusing one of the horses, they rubbed female pheromones on their bodies, dumped Kenneth's body outside of a local hospital, where he was quickly pronounced dead. Authorities began to investigate, leading them to a farm in Enumclaw, Washington. This particular farm was supposedly infamous in zoophile chat rooms as a hotspot for depraved animal abusers charged with trespassing and given a 1-year suspended sentence. On the bright side, however, the infamy of this case inspired Washington state legislators to craft and pass a bill outlawing sex with animals. Doug wrote a letter to Tate while in jail offering his help. He obviously sympathized with Tate, believing he was incarcerated on the basis of his sexuality. Doug even went as far as writing a letter to the Maury County Assistant Public Defender. Mr. Tate has also informed me that he, apparently, in the sole meeting you've ever had with him several weeks ago, you flashed a copy of several warrants at him, but refused to give yours, both with the judge, if there even is a judge in this current case, and with your state bar association. I don't have time to play games, find a few minutes in your busy schedule to validate that assumption on your part. This bizarre and unwavering advocacy for these strange people compelled law enforcement to begin investigating Doug Spink himself. Calls made to Tate's prison were obviously recorded and revealed Doug of animals. With a mountain of evidence against him, in the early morning of April 14, 2010, law enforcement approached Doug's recently purchased cabin in Sumas and arrested him for violating his parole. On the scene of his small cabin were dozens of dogs, horses, and mice, the latter of which by the Watcombe Humane Society, with Capone being returned to Corinne Super. Along with Doug disputed 3 of the violations, however conceded that he did travel out of state. He traveled to New York City to do a presentation on corporate jurisprudence at the Last Hope Conference. His presentation was posted online, where he openly admits to his quote-unquote relationship with Capone.
I have kind of an unusual lifestyle in that my primary physical famous athlete pays a lot of the bills around the farm actually with his work. He's also got 4 hooves and a tail. He's a show jumping stallion named Capone 1. People usually bluff and have for a long time.
Unfortunately for Doug, any disagreements he might have had with the case didn't really matter, and he was ultimately sentenced to 3 years in prison with another 2 years of probation. This sentencing was strictly for his federal probation violations, and he still faced charges of animal cruelty that were pending in Whatcom County. The news of Doug Spink's arrest and his bestiality farm quickly made headlines in Whatcom County. Working with Doug over the span of the next 8 years. This investigation resulted in the aforementioned book, Enabler. Nothing in this book demonstrates this better than its opening statement. This book is dedicated to the animals who are killed by humans when their secret lives with zoos are discovered. Corinne Maloney doesn't seem to be concerned with the animals who are taken advantage of by zoophiles. Rather, she is concerned with animals that are supposedly euthanized after their abuse is discovered. This sentiment is a common lie spread by zoophiles to deter their detractors from speaking out regarding the 2010 sting in Whatcom County. The mice discovered were euthanized under the belief that their lives would not be very good if they continued living. Given the fact that their tails were cut off, strings were tied to their body, they probably the scene were not euthanized. Rather, they were sent to various shelters or rehomed. On top of talking the terrible disgust about his interest than most zoos, sharing it with his family and friends. His father in particular was disgusted by this, and when he walked in on his son French kissing the family dog, referencing a handful of village attempt to excuse the deplorable acts of mentally ill degenerates. As to why Kareen felt a source of information. During these 8 years, Kareen would frequently meet up with Doug, beginning their string of it within our system of government, forced to run by herself after his arrest. When Doug was released from prison in April of 2013, the department, which was responsible for approving Doug's housing and ensuring he was not near animals, mistakenly approved his stay in the trailer. Not a sheep fucker. Doug rented a brand new home just 11 miles away, but still opted to not a sheep fucker. Doug rented a brand new home just 11 miles away, but still opted to spend most of his time on the farm. Katine ran into issues with coyotes poaching her sheep, which Doug lives in 2009. Johnson discovered this. He quickly called the police and placed blame in the hands of legal troubles, however, as he still faced charges of animal cruelty from his sting operation in Whatcom County. That being said, winning that case and to removing that statute from the book, he revoked and was forced to serve the remaining 9 months that, based on all I've seen and know. Going back, add some new change out of nowhere. August 9th, 2015, police were informed of a disheveled man. Spent the next August 9th, 2015, police were informed of a disheveled man with a towel around his waist wandering into local businesses along Warncliffe, PTSD, saying, "Yes, Buck, threatening to step fight. Once in the police cruiser, he smashed both of the backseat windows, Becca again, police at her neighbor's home. And during this, Doug began walking down the street in a panic state. A random driver noticed Doug on the side of the road and police. When they arrived at the scene, Doug was stayed for a week before being moved to Butler County Prison, where he faced a total of 5 counts of aggravated. It's remarkable that despite his habitual disregard for the law, he always manages to find himself out of prison. Doug was now more than ends with law enforcement. Paranoid by his previous encounters with police, Doug no longer felt safe living in his apartment, opting to sleep in his car in various locations in Butler County. In November of 2017, he accidentally got his car stuck in an alley, where he decided to just take a nap. A police dog calved with him. How he was able to gain access to another animal is beyond me, but we can basically chalk it up to pure negligence on the part of chapters of Doug's life. He found himself in a prison cell. Doug spent the next 11 months incarcerated of Doug's life. He found himself in a prison cell. Doug spent the next 11 months incarcerated, being released sometime in October of 2018. It was around this time that he began treatment for his recent liberation for zoophiles and their furry companions like he dreamt of. He wasted Doug's life. He found him in their bush. Over the years, Doug attempted to Doug's life, he found him there. He felt compelled to make one final push. Over the years, Doug attempted to, obviously with the goal of normalizing and destigmatizing zoophilia. The Deep Justice Network was created by Doug sometime in a Twitter account that featured videos of animals engaging in intercourse. The intent was seemingly pornography. Also includes the hashtag LGBTZ, created in a pathetic attempt to retcon are being taken advantage of every single day. And people are too ambivalent to do any. We'll show zoos exactly how we feel about their sexuality. On March 20th, 2019, and of course, tune into the first episode of our podcast, The Exposure Solution, on March 20th. What can you into the first episode of our podcast, The Exposure Solution, on March 20th? What can you expect from our podcast, The Exposure Solution, on March 20th? What can you expect from our podcast? Right off the bat, we'll be exposing a secret zoophile. Someone who's pretty famous, in fact. We'll have another one for you every single episode.
The first zoophile to be exposed is a household name in the fantasy community. He's even appeared in movies, on television, and has had roles in video games. This zoophile is the Lord of
the first file to fight for the rights of zoophiles.
When we started this podcast, I had been several months previously diagnosed with terminal stage 4 metastatic malignant melanoma that had spread to my lungs. And
the Kiwi Farms thread posted in November of 2018. Toggle the Rat, on the other hand, had no intentions of revealing his identity. Typically when posting selfies, Toggle used his iPhone's Memoji function to replace his head with a cartoon mouse. While this was successful in covering his face, it still left a trail of breadcrumbs that could potentially reveal his identity. In 2018, Toggle attended Midwest Fur Fest, posting multiple pictures of himself with friends, a black t-shirt, and a pair of glasses. People began searching for clues, eventually stumbling upon a photo posted by a user named Fink, featuring a man who fit the description, wearing wearing a similar outfit and pair of glasses. Kiwi Farmers also managed to find a Twitter account for these images, also share Toggle the Rat Twitter accounts, use the character creating software Hero Forge around the same time. Toggle also posted a picture of a new mask he had bought, which the lead singer of Exit Mouse also happened to own. While both of these could be pure coincidence, it certainly adds credence to the theory. As people dug deeper, they discovered a post made on Bandcamp in 2017, revealing the original name of the band was Husky in Denial, before changing it to Exit Mouse. During this era of the band, the vocalist's online moniker was Smooch This Pooch, demonstrated through archives of the band's Twitter. With this Twitter, Kiwi Farmers managed to find more pictures of the vocalist, along with pictures of his husband, Trevor. Most notably, however, the Husky in Denial Tumblr account was found, where the man carelessly docks himself while showing off his new guitar strings, revealing his name as Buck Riley. This coincides with both his Twitter and for Affinity accounts identifying himself as Buck. While the new address in the photo was out of date, Buck's husband, Trevor, accidentally leaked their new address when venting his frustrations at Grubhub not delivering his Taco Bell on time. Kiwi Farms users were able to locate his new home on Google Maps and confirmed his residency with a Facebook post showing the front yard and unique metal lattice trim. This post in particular was also a crucial piece of evidence that Toggle the Rat was in fact Buck. Posted on February 18th of 2020 about an abandoned dog that he and his husband had been taking in denial and Chipmunk Clunk. This led investigators to find a list of FedEx frequent and bizarre defense of cubs, which are underage furry characters. Eventually, through more digging, Kiwi Farmers were able to find out that Buck was only a nickname, with his real name being Charles Alexander Berry. Hypothetically, there is a chance that all of these parallels are simply a long string of unfortunate coincidences. However, this is very unlikely to be the case. It seems that Toggle became aware of Doug through his Cross Species Alliance Twitter account. Their first encounter actually sparked a disagreement regarding the infamous zoo sadism leaks of September 2018, during which Toggle, at one point, referred to the account's admin as petulant. However, this insult would not sour the future relationship between the two. Shortly after, Toggle happened to begin reading Uniquely Dangerous when he noticed that the Cross Species Alliance was referenced in the book. He quickly put two and two together and realized that Doug Spink was behind the account.
And I noticed in Maloney's description of the ransacked little shack that he lived in that the words Cross Species Alliance was written on a whiteboard in the background. So I messaged him later and I was like, hey, is this account run by Doug Spink? And he was like, yeah, there's a few people that run this account, but it's me typing right now.
The two struck up a friendship, and eventually Doug would inquire about starting a podcast. Thus, Zooier Than Thou was born. A brief description on the show's website reads, Zooier Than Thou is yet another monthly podcast covering the zoophile community and all things zooey and wonderful, with an openly positive romance to the mic, with the help of a dedicated cast and crew of zooey talent. There may be hundreds of others out there doing the same thing, but Zooier Than Thou ain't service violations. A notable quote comes from the very first episode.
With this podcast, what we're really all about is celebrating primarily the non-human side of things, their agency, their wisdom, their interests, and above all else, the well-being of the non-humans that share our lives. They do deserve their own voice. More than that, they deserve to have their agency.
I mean, it's dishonesty like that which allows us to tolerate heinous factory farm
Who are completely unable to defend their own bodies from these attacks. All of these terrible, terrible things we do to other species serve to reinforce a frankly evil worldview that sees animals as sexless, powerless, childish, forever, and directly challenge the assumed separation of humans from everybody else who shares residency on as equals, as friends, as partners.
The irony of advocating for animals as helpless victims of attacks and castration, only to moments later describe them as equal to human beings, is laughably stupid. Especially when you consider things like animal castration typically happen in the context of medical benefits. Food production. Nothing positive comes from having sex with your dog. Logical fallacies are a staple of the Zooier Than Thou podcast, with a healthy dose of cope and cognitive dissonance. To be fair, this is unsurprising, considering it's pretty difficult to make a good faith effort to defend zoophilia. Zooier Than Thou also dedicates time to responding to fan mail in a segment called Ask Zooey. It's severely unlikely that any of this mail is actually real, considering the first bit of mail they read was written by a dog.
Our first letter today, but I've discovered he has a very strange fetish for peanut butter, and I simply don't understand. I try to indulge him, but by the time I finally finished cleaning it off him, he slathered even more onto his balls. I want to make my human happy, but I don't know how much longer I can stand the taste of peanuts. What should I do?
They also use this segment to go into graphic detail about how to coerce animals, which for obvious reasons I won't be showing you. But the real cherry on top for these podcasts are the sponsored segments. You may be asking, who would sponsor a podcast like this? And the answer is no one. The sponsorships are fake. These sponsored segments, much like their Ask Zooey segment, are satirical ad placements for fake companies and businesses who also indulge in the exploitation of animals.
Looking to spice up your night with an unforgettable experience? Come on down to Tijuana Tommy's. Tommy's delivers what we assume is up to 8 for our happy hour drink special. 2 piping hot shots. Right from the tap for only $2.
It's likely that Toggle and Doug loaded their podcast to the brim with jokes and irony to feign some sort of satirical identity, anything he says. Most of the episodes in this podcast follow a similar structure, with a solid chunk dedicated to quote-unquote parody, and the rest dedicated to genuine advocacy for zoophilia. That being said, it's important to highlight and dissect some of these specific talking points and notable events of the show's history. One event that happened 5 months before the podcast starting up were the aforementioned zoosadism leaks of September 2018. It all started when a Twitter user by the name of Zoodanim uploaded a thread exposing a handful of prominent furries as zoosadists. Some of these names include Zyro, Techno Husky, and Kiro the Wolf. Attached to these tweets were chat logs and videos featuring various animals being tortured and abused. Zoodanim was a zoophile themselves, who claimed to be disgusted by the actions, messages, and videos shared in various Telegram chats, which are people who derive pleasure from physically maiming animals. Doug himself makes his hatred of zoosadists no secret.
Zoosadism, by definition, is the torture of other beings in order to derive pleasure from the pain they experience. This is one of the most horrible, most evil, most fucking disgusting things that human beings can do. There is no clinical or documented connection between zoosadism, which revolves around pain and misery and is not sexual in any meaningful sense, and zoophilia, which is a sexual orientation and involves reciprocal intimacy between adults who choose to engage in sexual relations with each other.
The reality is, as much as he postures about it, Doug doesn't actually care about animals in the way he'd like you to believe. His history of pimping out his self-described lovers and putting knives to their throats is the greatest indication of that. Rather, his hatred of zoosadists likely comes from the bad smell they leave behind. Doug is entirely thrilled with the leaks. In fact, he goes out of his way to discredit the information revealed and even stands up for
what's actually been released, the majority of which is really just text files that people claim are Telegram chat logs. And unfortunately, some people involved in hyping this up last fall were actually caught circulating fake and even malware-laden documents during these claimed leaks. So there's no way to know what's real and what's fake text-wise. Obviously, I'm not denouncing anyone without actual evidence they did something, not just someone else said that they heard that some other guy. For these accusers to point to images or videos. If the evidence existed, we'll make it public. Not text chat logs, which are so trivially easy to fake. I personally hope that Kiro can survive this terrible episode, and whatever his strengths or failings as a person and as a young man in the community at large, that he can use this experience to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate in the future.
Doug prefers that zoosadists be dealt with privately and quietly.
Address zoosadists in the past. For us, it's simple. It wasn't about getting lauded publicly or getting people arrested or getting people ostracized from the community. For us, success was making sure these people could never hurt another animal ever again. That's the goal, obviously. Now, short of that goal, we would deem our efforts to be a failure. Quote, make us look bad, or because it's fun to chase people around, or because you don't want them bringing heat on you by being around. No, you do it because they're monsters. They hurt others for pleasure. That's just so damn clear.
And as animal lovers, that really does seem like the reasonable benchmark for the success of a project like this.
Okay, so using that as a benchmark, they claim they were infiltrating all this zoosadist talk, but I have my own personal concerns about how they ended up so tangled up in the middle of all zoosadists, you know?
In reality, his concerns with zoosadism is nothing more than half-hearted virtue signaling, all done in a pathetic attempt to posture zoophiles as morally righteous answer treatment. Toggle conducts a solo interview with a person named Kion. Kion supposedly had been in the zoo community as long as Doug had, meaning he was an active member in the earliest days of the internet. It was during this time that he was producing not safe for work content featuring animals and posting it online for other people who like that stuff to see. Funnily enough, during this episode, the hosts themselves go on to discuss how there are many moral costs of a thing. This is where Kion tries to make a distinction between bestialism and zoophilia.
Bestialist is very much the physical aspect in sticking a dick in something or receiving a fucking from an animal. that's exciting and novel because it's an animal, rather than having formed any sort of because it's an animal. Rather than having formed any sort of relationship with the animal, of trust and familiarity. You can't jump a fence and screw a dog and
like Doug and LGBT movement. This comes along with the duo referring to anti-zoo sentiments as bigoted and referring to those who oppose their lifestyle as zoophobes. Much like this, the concept of zoo pride is often brought up.
Speaking personally, I have been deeply touched by many of the listener submissions on the topic of zoo pride. In addition to the wonderful diversity of views on what zoo pride means to each of us, the overall zeitgeist of the community.
Frequent talking point in the podcast as well, even referencing supposed misogyny within the zoo community.
I don't know that men are more harshly criticized as much as
weird, misogynistic bigotry and hatred that underlies so much of this.
All of this is very intentional. Crafting actual arguments as to why their sexuality is okay is obviously impossible. It's much easier to reuse the rhetoric from LGBT spaces to create as many parallels as possible to something recognizable. Many understand and sympathize with the plight of gay people in society, and Zooier Than Thou attempts to promote zoophilia as a social justice cause only a few steps behind. Doing this postures those who oppose them as equivalent to homophobes, and would put them on the wrong side of history in Doug's eyes. When called out for their non-consensual acts against animals, they project onto those who criticize them, ironically accusing them of projection and questioning their understanding of sex.
I really have a problem with sex in general being seen as like a violent act, an act of asserting one's power.
Well, let's note the people who are making assertions of sex as a violent act. What does that tell us about the people making those assertions?
Yeah. Right.
And those people then project that disgusting, their behavior real, and then attacking it in some way, attacking themselves and something, and in the meantime, we're sitting here shrugging our shoulders like, what the hell is that about?
Rather than advocating for themselves in a good faith manner, Zooier Than Thou seeks to gaslight its detractors into believing that they are simply ignorant and hateful bigots who are projecting and don't have any real. A common stereotype amongst those in the furry fandom is that they harbor a secret attraction to real-life animals. This negative stereotype has compelled many furries to actively speak out against this animal.
Zoos, and in that strong desire, the persecution becomes more heated.
But because they could not be out as zoos, they used furry in part as a kind of subterfuge in case anybody had was suspicious of them. If anybody wanted to accuse of them, if anybody wanted to accuse them of, being dog fuckers or something.
This is a common theme in all of the talking points frequently used in the podcast. Zoos are never the ones to blame. It's everyone else's fault but their own. This belief is further exemplified by the host's insistent rants about a man named Randy Zoobuster Pepe. Randy was a supposedly reformed zoophile who turned on the community and outed as many people as he could in the late 90s. And Doug was supposedly one of his victims. In a thread posted to Toggle's Twitter account, he shares a very interesting take on Randy's involvement with the current stigma around zoophiles. He claims that Randy single-handedly spawned the hatred that zoophiles face today. It was his original idea that having sex with animals was bad, and no one else thought it was the case until he convinced them. He even supposedly crafted the quote-unquote false paradigm that animals can't consent. That's right, guys, we've all been unknowingly brainwashed by this one guy from the 90s. We're the weird ones, we're the bigots, we're the deranged lunatics degrading animals, not the zoophiles, no. And it's all Randy Zoobuster's fault. Zooier Than Thou's first season is 24 long, excruciating episodes, chock full of delusion and projection. Rarely, if not ever, do they make actual arguments as to why animals are capable of consent. Rather, they spend a majority of their time talking about how hard their lives are and blaming everyone else for not understanding them, all while throwing in a healthy pinch of buzzwords and social justice quips to feign some sort of intellectual and important discourse. Doug's death was looming over him throughout the entire podcast. He was frequently absent in a few episodes, often dealing with complications due to his chemo treatments.
I am currently in between chemotherapy treatments. And I have not started the next protocol yet. So I am off chemo right now for the first time in many months.
According to Doug, he was also not taking his oral chemotherapy behind his oncologist's back.
Over the summer, I almost died in June, again from chemo.
His initial diagnosis was evolving rapidly. The cancer traveled from his skin into his lymph nodes, which then spread to his lungs and trachea. An already difficult cancer to beat was now an inevitable death sentence. This leads us to January 24th of 2020, when Doug's husband, Zeman Depo, would announce that Douglas Spink had passed away. In episode 11.5 of the Zooier Than Thou podcast, Doug's husband would also further expand on the death of his late husband.
Knowing and loving Doug was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I know that he touched a lot of people's lives. Perhaps the most profound thing he did was to, as you say, choose the hard battle. He stood for all of us, whether they wanted him to or not. He always stood morally upright, whether keeping the confidence of any zoo who spoke to him, or proclaiming to the world that we are zoos, we are here, and we are creatures too, and deserve to love and be loved in return in all aspects.
This episode features, if there was any doubt she sympathized with Doug Pryor, going out of her way to give a remembrance of him certainly proves otherwise.
An outspoken and controversial figure, he garnered worldwide attention. He was adored by some just as he was hated by others, and that was fine with him. In all of history, until the end of time, there will never be...
He believes his legacy should be.
I think he'd want to be remembered for being just one of many positive forces in his community, one that inspired others to be more positive and to do all the things he couldn't do in his lifetime. Sharp-witted. He was warm and he
upload to YouTube. Despite being previously taken down, new accounts were quickly created with no issue. It seems like for the time being, YouTube negligently allows this podcast to continue to exist. After the legal system consistently failed to put a stop to Doug's endless reign of chaos and abuse, cancer would save the day. While many celebrated his death, there were, of course, many like-minded freaks who mourned his passing. The most chilling aspect about Doug's life was the countless number of zoophiles who truly believed Doug Spink was a civil rights activist fighting for a just cause. A man who led a life of constant abuse and violence is fondly remembered by many as a hero. Make no mistake, Douglas Brian Spink was a mentally deranged animal abuser, no matter how hard he tried to convince others or himself that he wasn't. Even at a young age, he hated himself for the feelings he had, only deciding to indulge under the guise of self-acceptance. The man who claimed his love for animals was healthy had no problem pimping them out to other sick freaks and putting their lives in danger. His cross-species activism was nothing more than a pathetic attempt to excuse the monster he truly was. Doug existed in an eternal state of delusion, and he died the same exact way. But, as one Kiwi Farms user puts it, when the only people who are sad about your death are people who have sex with animals, you've lived a wasted and useless life. I've been Turkey Tom. Thanks for watching. Starting point, there would be very little conflict, but actually there's a lot. From his rise and fall is greater than that of Cosmo Wright. From being one of the most popular and beloved competitive speedrunners, from being one of the most popular people on all of Twitch, to destroying his entire career and falling into a pit of mental despair that few think can ever be climbed out of. This is the story of Cosmo, now known as Narcissa Wright, and how they destroyed everything they had. Born, they destroyed everything they had. Born Cosmo Wright in the same year nothing happened at Tiananmen Square, Wright grew up in Wisconsin, 7 years old, and consequently, he became obsessed with Ocarina of Time, one of the games he'd later become famous for while speedrunning. And during childhood, his infatuation with the game never waned, as 10 years later, he stumbled upon an online forum called Speed Demos Archive. Now, speedrunning is essentially playing any game, whether it be Mario or Call of Duty, and trying to play it from front to back in as little time as possible. Gamers had already been accepting the challenge for as long as gaming existed, and as the internet became more accessible, that same year. 1 year later, NSD emerged with another site and was renamed Speed Demos Archive, being one of the earliest examples of a speedrunning community online. By 2006, the SDA was rife with information on speedrunning Nintendo games, which, having played Ocarina of Time front to back a myriad of times at this point, really piqued Cosmo's attention, as it presented him with a new way of exploring his favorite game, strategically glitching through it as fast as possible. He was already campaigns as quickly as possible. During this period, Cosmo prodded into the speedrunning world in obscurity, with only the odd honorable mention from another. Majority of people didn't even know it existed, and even if they did, connecting and collaborating with other runners was not exactly a facilitated process. These are obsessive gamers after all, so socializing isn't necessarily their forte. Since in August of 2007, Giano posted a video of him trying out one of Cosmo's them properly. In 2010, Giano speedran Majora's Mask with commentary.
And this is my Majora's Mask in 1:53, 1 hour 53 minutes, and I have some other commentators here with me.
This is Cosmo.
At the time, having commentary was a big deal since most gaming channels had a hard time simultaneously recording their gameplay and their commentary about whatever was going on screen. This same year, the SDA forums also created the Games Done Quick organization in the form of a charity marathon during another event called MagFest. Despite internet issues that caused the entire thing to be moved over to the house of the event organizer's mom, the event successfully raised over $10,000, a clear sign that the speedrunning community was teeming with potential. Seeing that potential, Giano and Cosmo decided to capitalize on it as much as they possibly could. In February 2011, they took part in an Ocarina of Time 4-way race, which didn't only have commentary, but also a face cam of everyone in the room. Again, pretty innovative and high quality for that era. And what was even more innovative was Giano and Cosmo's newest creation, Speedruns Live. Since the very beginning, they were looking for better ways of storing their speedrun times, as storing them in a simple text file was becoming pretty annoying. Thus, Speedruns Live was created to track and facilitate competitive speedrunning in real time. This thing was so primitive that it functioned through an IRC, which you probably aren't familiar with, a platform that would later become Twitch. By June of that year, the site had already been revamped and looked much better than it did initially, and it was already a cornerstone of the speedrunning community would be a massive understatement. Chicago, he continued to split his time between his speedrunning endeavors and freelance artwork, usually related to web design, which is something he openly acknowledged he didn't really care for as much as speedrunning, but felt obligated to do. According to him, he felt guilty because streaming and speedrunning didn't feel like a job due to how much he enjoyed it, and he had a hard time shaking that guilt off and committing to it full time. Throughout 2012, but despite not having won the race, Cosmo wasn't just good at hosting these events, as he continued honing his skill over 3 hours, and his run here was a fantastic success. The event raised $149,000 for charity, and although Wright did the impressive feat of finishing the game 30 minutes faster than initially estimated in front of a live audience, he did it while giving compelling commentary detailing how he exploited the game's quirks, which is exactly what people in speedrunning wanted. The description of the video calls it the best live speedrun ever, and the comments at the time all reflected how amazing this was, with people saying that this run was what got them into speedrunning. Seeing how successful these videos got on YouTube, in July, Cosmo created his own account. After uploading a few videos that showed only his gameplay, he began including a camera that was pointed not at his face, but at his hands, which showed that his nails were painted. Something around him doing it as a charity donation goal to see your face than your hands, but this was his executive creative decision. And since he was a speedrunner, it did kind of make sense that he showed his hands performing the inputs on the controller, as many other runners were doing at the time. I still think it would be more effective to do that with those input interfaces where it clearly shows what buttons you're pressing, like your speedrun's description. By December of 2012, his channel had amassed almost 300,000 they had in 2012. In September of that same year, an article in the Sydney Morning Herald was published about Wright and the teeming speedrunning community. A clear sign of May 13 began, which was a massive success. While the previous year's event raised almost $150 grand for charity, which was a pretty impressive sum for a speedrunning convention of all things. 2013's raised nearly 450 grand, an amount that not even the organizers expected. Online, the event was getting more attention with a ton of hits of their own. And by the way, the one that got over 3 million views is this one, which I personally think is just absolutely majestic and a perfect picture of the true nature of the speedrunning community. When the guy playing Mega Man looks like a shirtless medieval peasant, that's how you know you're in the presence of a real gamer. Despite how successful these other runs were, Wright, seemingly without even trying, was definitely the de facto protagonist of the entire convention.
Okay, so what that did was it took me...
Not only was he extremely talented at what he did, but he was also very entertaining with his commentary, which many other speedrunners lacked. As he performed the sequence breaks, he articulately explained exactly what he was doing. This was particularly entertaining when he hyped up a part of the game.
Getting Ganon's head. If I don't get it, I'm gonna run like hell, because Ganon will kill me. I only have one shot at getting it. If I don't get it though, I can get it again, but I'll have to be kind of careful about it. So I want to just kind of focus right here. It's also extra hard too, because I have to use the C stick to hit C up, and it's frame perfect. Yeah, I guess so. Got it.
He also went over the history of Ocarina of Time speedrunning, highlighting that it took a total of 14 years speedrunning were able to easily get into it, and they found themselves rewatching the speedrun repeatedly. Even years later, videos about how speedruns are done are regularly garnering millions of views, meaning Cosmo was unknowingly a very early adopter of a very successful genre of content. What he had here was undoubtedly unique, and his following genuinely cherished it. Part of the appeal was seeing someone who is visibly shy and awkward completely own a room while doing something he's really good at. A few months later, the SGDQ was held, which is basically the summer edition of AGDQ, and it raised another $250,000. And also, on his personal channel, he uploaded a video of himself breaking the world record for Ocarina of Time. And despite his time being literally the best in the world, he still wasn't satisfied. Its own Kotaku article. In the video's description, he says that completing the game in under 19 minutes was possible, barely even acknowledging his own mile, and always pushed him. Sigilemic was really good at, effectively parodying people for him to get acquainted with the game enough to speedrun it, but that he'd spent so much time playing Ocarina of Time that he couldn't even guess the number anymore. In another interview, this time from early 2014, Wright revealed that his regularly tuned into his streams, donated to him, and paid for subscriptions. Although he did least, he had the liberty to change the games he played whenever he felt burnt out, which allowed him to persevere whenever he didn't want to do another marathon stream. Now, Cosmo wasn't just winning professionally either, as in ordering her pizza. The thing is, Adrian also suffered from severe depression and anxiety, was in tens of thousands of dollars in college debt, and had originally started interacting with Cosmo online when she sent him a donation while she was in the hospital to get a cancer. He actually proposed to her, although we don't know what her response was. At this point, Cosmo had succeeded at getting world record speedruns in 4 different Nintendo 64 games, and was one of the most popular streamers on Twitch. Not just the top spots on Twitch were taken by people who played MOBA games. So being one of the most popular people on the entire platform while speedrunning 20-year-old games is no small feat. In 2014, he took part in AGDQ again, which raised over $1 million for Prevent Cancer, and he looked happier than ever. Things seemed to be going fine as his audience continued to grow by leaps and bounds, and he developed a reputation that preceded him as a speedrunner who achieved every single goal he set.
That I'm trying to relax from my fucking trip. And yet, I still got the Commander Keen 4 record. Bodied that. Castlevania 64, both characters. I want to get the record for both characters. I already have Reinhardt, but I want to beat it by 2 minutes, man. I want to get like 49 something. 49.33. That doesn't seem too bad. I think, yeah, like 49.50 or something would be sick. And then, carry, I want to get like a low 43 or a 42 minute time. Oh my god, this is the best speedrun I've ever done in my life. Carry again, that's it.
The last objective he set during this rant was an 18-minute run of Ocarina of Time,